It started the way many haunting stories do. Quietly. No alarms. No headlines. Just a routine moment that felt a little off. The janitor, Mr. Howard, had cleaned that same library every night for over 13 years. He knew its rhythms. The creak in the fourth floor, the hum of the vending machine after 10, the way the light in the back corner flickered for 2 seconds before going out. But what he didn't expect, what stopped him the first night, was the girl. She was there long after closing, curled up between rows J and K, her backpack propped under her head like a makeshift pillow. At first, he thought she had simply fallen asleep. College students often did. But she didn't leave when he turned on the lights. She didn't wake when the vacuum roared to life. And when he gently nudged her awake, she apologized without making eye contact and slipped out the side door like a ghost. The next night, she was back. Same spot, same posture, same silence. Mr. Howard asked around. No one knew her name. No one had seen her arrive. But night after night, she returned. And with each appearance, he noticed more. The dark circles under her eyes, the fraying of her coat sleeves, the way she held her breath when someone passed too close. She wasn't just tired. She was hiding. The library wasn't just a place to rest. It was a shelter. He began leaving granola bars near her spot. Sometimes a bottled water. Once a note. If you need help, say something. She never took the note, but the food disappeared. Slowly, something fragile formed between them. Not a friendship, but a quiet trust. She began nodding at him. Whispered, "Thank you," once. He never pressed her. Never asked questions. He just showed up. Until one night, she didn't. Her corner was empty. Her backpack on. No sign she'd ever been there. Mr. Howard checked every floor. He waited until sunrise. But she never returned. And in the days that followed, as the shelves stood still and the lights flickered on schedule, one question echoed louder than any silence the janitor had ever known. Who was the girl in the library? And where had she gone? Mr. Howard didn't sleep well that night. His routine had become oddly dependent on seeing her. Not knowing who she was had frustrated him at first. But over time, her presence had become comforting, like a heartbeat in a silent room. Without her there, the library felt hollow. He kept glancing over his shoulder during his rounds, waiting to hear the soft rustle of her coat, or the unmistakable sound of her zipper as she adjusted her backpack. But there was nothing, only emptiness. The next evening, he checked the usual spot early, before the lights dimmed. Still nothing. He began retracing possible places she could have moved to. The basement reading room, the archives, the unused third-floor study alcove. He even checked the emergency stairwells. Nothing. Not a trace. No scraps of snack wrappers. No indent in the carpet where she used to lie. It was as if she had been carefully erased. On the fourth night, he found something. A single index card, half tucked behind the radiator beneath the window she usually sat by in the mornings. It had no name. Just a short sentence in slanted, fading ink. "Thank you for noticing me." He stared at it for a long time, unsure if he should feel comforted or devastated. It was the first and last piece of her he would ever hold in his hands. And it wasn't enough. His instincts told him something wasn't right. This wasn't a student who had gone home. This was someone who didn't have a home to return to. Someone who slipped through the cracks of systems meant to catch kids before they hit the ground. He reached out to campus security, then administration, then student services. No one had a record of her. She wasn't registered. No library card. No ID badge ever scanned. She was invisible, but she had been real. Determined not to let the trail go cold, Mr. Howard visited local shelters, youth outreach centers, even soup kitchens in the area. With only her vague description, teenage, pale skin, oversized coat, quiet demeanor, he asked gently, cautiously. Most had seen dozens of kids like that. None had a name. None had a match. And slowly, an unbearable truth began to take root. He might have been the only person in her life who ever knew she existed, and he hadn't even asked her name. Mr. Howard became obsessed with routine. Not his, hers. He began reconstructing her pattern of arrival, reviewing old surveillance tapes from the rear service entrance, zooming in on grainy footage of a hooded figure slipping through the loading dock door each night, always after 10, always alone. She came in with the wind, quiet, almost weightless. But she was there, night after night, for nearly 4 months. How had no one else noticed? He reviewed the tapes dozens of times, noting her posture, her hesitations, the way she lingered near the shelves before settling into her corner. Sometimes she read thick novels, battered poetry collections. Other times, she simply sat with her arms wrapped around her knees, watching shadows stretch across the walls. She never used a phone, never spoke, and always left just before dawn, like she didn't want to be found, but also didn't want to disappear entirely. Driven by guilt and something deeper, a sense of unfinished duty, Mr. Howard began posting discreet flyers around campus, seeking information about a girl seen regularly in the campus library. Not in trouble, just concerned. Please help. Most were ignored. Some were torn down. But one day, a note appeared on the back of one flyer. Written in pencil, barely legible. She was in the shelter last month. Didn't stay. He followed the lead, visited the shelter, talked to a tired, middle-aged volunteer who remembered a girl matching the description. She had shown up soaking wet during a rainstorm, refused a bed, asked only for a quiet place to sit, stayed 2 hours, then left when the other kids started fighting over socks. Did she give a name? Mr. Howard asked. The woman shook her head. Just said she was looking for someone who used to work in a library. His heart stopped. He didn't cry. Not then. Not when he got home. But that night, sitting in his armchair with her index card in his hand, something broke open. He realized he had meant something to her. Not because he saved her, but because he noticed. And in a world that passed her by 1,000 times, unnoticed, that alone had made a difference. But was it enough, if she was still out there, still alone? Days turned into weeks. The library returned to its usual rhythm, students coming and going, the occasional late-night straggler, and the quiet hum of fluorescent lights overhead. But for Mr. Howard, nothing was the same. Every night, as he pushed his mop down the aisles, he found himself glancing toward her corner, half expecting to see her curled up again, half dreading that he never would. The absence of her presence had become louder than her silence ever was. He began keeping a journal, not just to record what he remembered about her, her posture, her mannerisms, the books she liked, but to process his own growing restlessness. He wrote down everything. The night she smiled faintly after seeing the granola bar, the time she folded her coat like a pillow, the way she always stared out the window between midnight and 2. The more he wrote, the more he realized how much of her life had lived quietly in his periphery, and how deeply he'd come to care. One night, after closing, he noticed something new. A slim paperback tucked into the corner of the poetry section. Not shelved, just left there, spine out. Curious, he pulled it out. It was a used copy of Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur. Inside, on the title page, was a note written in blue pen. I'm still reading. Just not here anymore. His knees gave out as he sat slowly on the floor, the book cradled in his hands like a voice that had reached across miles. It was her. He didn't know how the book had gotten there, if she'd slipped in when he wasn't watching, or left it with someone else to place for her. But it was her handwriting, and it wasn't a goodbye. It was something else. Proof of life. Proof that wherever she was, she hadn't let go of words. She hadn't let go of herself. And in a strange way, that mattered more than knowing her name ever could. He placed the book back exactly where he found it, then left a note of his own inside the cover. Keep reading. We're still here. He didn't know if she'd ever come back to find it, but it felt right. It felt like the start of something unspoken, a way of continuing a connection that refused to be erased. Not by silence, not by time, not even by vanishing. That weekend, Mr. Howard took the bus to the downtown district, a part of the city known for its hidden corners, shelters, and halfway houses. He brought copies of the girl's note and a few of his own flyers, but something deeper pulled him there. A need to understand where she might have gone, to put himself, even briefly, into the places she'd likely wandered through, hungry, cold, invisible. He spoke to shopkeepers, baristas, even a security guard outside an all-night laundromat. Most didn't recognize the girl from the photos he sketched. Some didn't even stop to look. But one older man, hunched near a newspaper stand, pointed to a mural 3 blocks away, a wall painted with swirling blue birds and a figure curled beneath a tree. That went up a few nights ago, he said. Someone tagged the corner. She reads in silence. Mr. Howard walked the blocks with a pounding heart. The mural was still fresh, the paint slightly wet under the fading sun. And there it was. In the lower right corner, beneath the final bird, a small cluster of letters scrawled in thin black marker. Row J, floor 2. Library light. His eyes welled up. It was her. It had to be. She was still out there, still remembering, still sending signals to the only person who had ever truly seen her. He returned to the library that night with new purpose. Cleaned the floor with more care. Left another granola bar at the edge of her old spot. This time, beside a small folded paper. Still watching. Still here. Always. No one else would understand. No one else needed to. Because this wasn't about rescue anymore. It was about connection. A thread, however fragile, that hadn't snapped. And in that moment, as the clock struck midnight and the library hummed its usual song, Mr. Howard felt something shift. Not closure, not certainty, but hope. That maybe she hadn't vanished at all. Maybe she was just waiting for the world to learn how to look for her the way he had. Patiently, quietly, with eyes that don't turn away. The mural changed everything. Mr. Howard wasn't the only one who noticed. Over the next few days, students began stopping by that wall, taking photos, posting them online. The phrase, "she reads in silence," started appearing on social media, often with no explanation, just the image of the swirling blue birds and that lonely figure beneath the tree. What had once been a quiet corner of the city was now whispered about in hallways and study groups like urban legend. Someone printed the mural onto stickers and left them inside library books. Others began writing small messages in margins of paperbacks, hopeful notes, invisible gestures. "We're still looking. You matter. Come back when you can." Mr. Howard found dozens of these messages during his shifts, and though none were written by her, they were clearly written for her. It wasn't just a search anymore. The story had caught fire, soft, flickering but spreading. Then one morning, a librarian found something strange. A return card, left outside the building before sunrise. On it, a stack of used books, each one marked with a paper tab. Inside every tab was the same message, written in the same familiar slanted hand. Not lost. Just between chapters. Mr. Howard was called down immediately. His hands trembled as he turned the pages, recognizing the signature curve of her letters. It was her. She was reaching out, not asking for help, just letting them know she was still writing her life. He took one of the messages home, framed it beside the index card she had left behind, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that sometimes the best thing you can do for someone isn't to pull them into the light, but to leave the light on so they can find their way when they're ready. It became the principle by which he moved through every shift, every search, every night that passed without her face reappearing. But just when he had begun to settle into the idea that she was gone, but not gone, the library camera caught something. A flicker of movement. A girl, hooded, slipping past the back hallway at 3:47 a.m., right before the morning staff arrived. She didn't stop, didn't turn, but she left something behind near row J. A small, folded scarf, warm-colored, gently frayed at the edges. And inside it, another note. "I remember you." The scarf sat in Mr. Howard's hands like a heartbeat. It smelled faintly of lavender and old pages, a scent that had lingered around her whenever she'd walked through the stacks. He didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, he pressed the scarf gently to his chest and whispered, "I remember you too." Because now, after everything, this was no longer a search. It was a conversation, slow, quiet, unfolding between shadows and shelves. The surveillance footage was grainy, but clear enough to confirm what he already knew. She had grown. A little taller. Her coat was different. Her stride more steady. But the way she moved, soft, careful, almost weightless, was still unmistakably hers. The staff reviewed the footage, but chose not to report it. They understood now. She didn't want to be caught. She wanted to be known. On her own terms. Word of the scarf traveled softly through the campus. A few students created a space on the second floor, a small reading corner now unofficially named the Nest. There, anyone could leave a book, a message, or just sit in silence. No one asked questions. It became a sanctuary for the overlooked, the anxious, the wandering. And though she never showed up again in the cameras, books continued to appear there, always with the same scrawled message, chapter by chapter. Mr. Howard visited the nest every night. Sometimes he left a granola bar. Sometimes a bookmark with a handwritten quote. Once, he left a photo of the mural with his own note on the back. You were never invisible. You were just quiet. We see you now. It remained there, untouched, for over a week. And then one night, it disappeared. No one saw who took it. But the next evening, a paperback was left in its place, underlined in pencil at one line. Even the smallest lights, if steady, can guide someone home. And in that moment, under dim library lights and worn carpet, Mr. Howard didn't need answers. He didn't need a name. He had something stronger than certainty. He had continuation, a life not vanished but moving, a girl not lost but becoming. And he knew, deep in the quiet place where hope survives, that the story wasn't over. It had simply turned the page. Mr. Howard began marking the calendar differently after that night, not with red circles or stars, but with a small pencil dot for each day. Something quietly changed. A new book in the nest, a folded note tucked in the spine, a scarf left on the coat rack near the south entrance. These weren't coincidences. They were rhythms, footprints. She was still there, still watching, still trusting, but only from a distance she could control. Others began to notice too. Students who once walked past the janitor without a glance now stopped to ask if he'd seen the newest message. One girl, barely 17, whispered, "She helped me. I don't know her, but I feel less alone." The nest had become more than a corner of the library. It had become a living, breathing space of recovery. Not because someone was rescued, but because someone had been seen. Mr. Howard kept writing. His journal, once a collection of memory and regret, had become a kind of dialogue. "You don't owe me anything," he wrote one night, "but I hope you know that you changed my life." Sometimes he left his pages tucked in fiction books. Sometimes under a poetry collection she once read. He wasn't sure she was finding them, until the night he discovered one of them marked in return. Inside the journal, a single line had been underlined. "I didn't ask your name, and I should have." Next to it, in that same slanted writing, "You called me kid once. I liked that. It made me feel real." His hands trembled as he read it again and again. She hadn't vanished. She had anchored, not to the world, but to him, to the only person who had never asked her to explain herself before offering kindness. That night, Mr. Howard didn't sweep the floor right away. He sat in the corner of row J, where her scarf had once been, where she used to read until dawn. He sat with his journal open, pen in hand, and wrote a single sentence. "Whenever you're ready, there's still a light here." Then he closed the journal, placed it on the shelf, and quietly resumed his work, humming to himself as the library breathed around him. Time moved on, as it always does. Midterms came, then winter break. The campus emptied, the library fell into silence, and for the first time in weeks, the nest remained untouched. Mr. Howard checked it every evening, not out of obligation, but out of care. The scarf remained. The book stayed in place. The quiet began to feel heavier again, and just when he started to wonder if she had moved on for good, he found a new note. It was slipped inside an old copy of Jane Eyre, folded twice, written in green ink. The handwriting was unmistakable. "I'm learning how to live without hiding. It's harder than disappearing." He sat down on the nearest bench, heart aching, not from sorrow, but from pride. She was telling the truth, telling him the truth. She wasn't just surviving now. She was trying to belong, to exist beyond shadows. The next night, something changed. Mr. Howard returned to the library after hours, like always, and saw someone sitting in the nest. Not hidden, not tucked away, just sitting, book in hand. He didn't approach. He didn't need to. She looked up just once and nodded. Not in fear, not in flight, but in recognition, as if to say, "You were right. I'm still here." Then, quietly, she returned to her page. He didn't speak of it to anyone, didn't try to capture the moment or freeze it in memory. He simply carried it, because for all the weeks of uncertainty, of questions and silence, of looking for signs, the answer had come back. Not with noise, but with presence. She didn't need saving anymore. She needed space, and he had given it to her, the greatest gift of all. And so, he continued his work, sweeping, shelving, watching, leaving granola bars sometimes, even when he knew she wouldn't take them, because it wasn't about rescue anymore. It was about witnessing. staying close enough to remind someone they exist, and far enough to let them come back on their own. The return of spring brought new light into the library. Longer days meant softer shadows, and with them came more students lingering in the nest. It was no longer just a space for the girl. It had become a sanctuary for anyone who needed quiet without explanation. And though she never spoke, never signed her name, her presence lingered in the folded notes, the highlighted poems, and the warmth that seemed to settle into that small corner of the world. One day, tucked inside the binding of a weathered anthology, Mr. Howard found something different. Not a note, a drawing. It was simple, a girl sitting on the floor of a library, a mop leaning against the wall, and a man sweeping quietly in the background. At the bottom, one line had been written in pencil. "You made the quiet feel safe." He stared at it for a long time, overwhelmed. It wasn't just gratitude, it was recognition. The kind most people never get to receive while they're still alive. He framed the drawing, placed it beside his journal at home, beneath the index card she had left on that very first night. His story, their story, had become a constellation of paper and ink, a trail of survival built not from rescue, but from patience. It changed the way he moved through the world. He began noticing others more. The boy who always sat alone in the hallway, the woman who lingered too long by the vending machine, the girl who flinched when someone spoke too loudly. And slowly, others started to notice too. Students who once passed each other silently, now exchanged small nods, left sticky notes on books, shared music playlists, and poems anonymously. It wasn't loud. It wasn't structured, but it was alive, a ripple effect of presence. And at the center of it all, though few realized it, was a girl who once slept between shelves, and the janitor who had simply chosen to see her. One night, long after closing, Mr. Howard found a sealed envelope placed gently on the chair in the nest. It held a folded page and a library card, her first one, unused, but registered now. Inside the page, "I have a name again. I used it to check out a book today. I just thought you should know. I'm finally turning the page." And just like that, everything he'd waited to hear arrived in the quietest way possible, not as a scream for help, but as a whisper of return. That single library card changed everything for Mr. Howard. He held it like a passport, proof that she had crossed over from invisibility to being, not just in his world, but in hers. The staff hadn't recognized her at the front desk, but they remembered her kindness, her quiet voice, the way she handled each book like it was sacred. She asked where the poetry section was. One of the clerks said, smiling. She walked like she belonged. The next few weeks brought a new rhythm. The books she checked out appeared in the nest regularly, marked with her delicate handwriting, not in ink, but with soft pencil underlines. Always subtle, always chosen. Mr. Howard began to learn her language through those lines, the way she paused at words like safe, return, light, and home. These were not annotations. These were affirmations. She was mapping herself back into the world. He began leaving his own annotations in return, faint stars in the margins beside her lines, or a penciled phrase from a different book that responded in theme. It became their dialogue, a thread of mutual seeing woven through pages no one else thought to open. And though they never spoke in words, their bond deepened, a living proof that connection doesn't always require voice, just witnessing. Then, on a rainy afternoon, something changed. A student found a book left at the library's front desk, wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a small sketchbook, dozens of pages filled with her drawings. Each one chronicled a part of her journey, from the first night on the floor of Row J, to the mural, to the nest. On the final page, a girl stood in the sunlight outside the library, her back turned, a small group of students gathered behind her. And at the bottom, in handwriting now steadier, stronger, bolder, were the words, "Thank you for holding my place while I remembered how to return." Mr. Howard sat with the sketchbook in his lap for hours, not because he needed answers, but because he had been given the greatest one of all. She hadn't vanished. She had simply needed someone to wait, without question, until she remembered that she was worth coming back to. In the weeks that followed the discovery of the sketchbook, Mr. Howard noticed a quiet shift in the energy of the library. It wasn't dramatic. No headlines. No announcements. But the silence felt different now. Less hollow, more full. As if every creak in the floor and every echo between the shelves held a layer of gratitude. He began seeing unfamiliar students lingering in the nest, eyes wide, shoulders softening, like they'd stumbled into something sacred. One afternoon, he passed by and saw a young boy hunched over a notebook, drawing. Not copying, creating. A gentle image of a girl beneath a tree with birds overhead. Not the same mural, but inspired by it. Without interrupting, Mr. Howard knelt beside him and simply said, "That's beautiful." The boy looked up, surprised, and replied, "My sister used to sit here. She never talked much, but she liked this spot." It was all he said. It was all that needed to be said. That moment lingered with Mr. Howard long after his shift ended. It reminded him that this story, the one that began with a girl hiding in plain sight, was no longer just hers. It had woven itself into the quiet fabric of the building, into the hands of students who'd never met her, into the lives of people who needed a space that asked for nothing but honesty and breath. She had started something, and she hadn't even realized it. The mural downtown had become something of a pilgrimage. Students began leaving small offerings beneath it, books, poems, even scarves and gloves during the colder weeks. No one vandalized it. No one claimed ownership. It simply existed like a living monument to recovery, resilience, and return. Some nights, Mr. Howard would take the long way home just to stand in front of it. He never spoke while there. He just listened. And then, one evening, a new line appeared in delicate script beneath the original text. She reads in silence, but the world is listening now. It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. Mr. Howard smiled as he read it, because he knew. She was no longer the girl who slept in shadows. She had stepped into the light, quietly, boldly, completely on her own terms. As spring matured into early summer, the library buzzed with an unfamiliar sense of calm. It wasn't that the noise had vanished, but the kind of noise had changed. More shared laughter, softer conversations. Even the sound of pages turning had taken on a deeper rhythm. Mr. Howard continued his evening routine. Floors to sweep, trash to empty. But now, it felt more like tending to something alive. Like he wasn't just maintaining a building, but guarding a sanctuary. He still received notes from her. Not directly, but through books she returned, messages tucked between pages like gentle echoes. One day, inside a copy of The Little Prince, he found a single line. "What is essential is invisible, unless someone chooses to see it." And beside it, in her handwriting, "You saw me." He didn't reply in writing. He simply placed that copy in the nest, open to the page, with a small flower press between the margins. No explanation, no credit, just presence. The library administration eventually caught on. They knew something had happened, even if they didn't know the details. One evening, the director approached Mr. Howard and said, "Whatever you're doing in that corner, keep doing it. The students feel it." He nodded humbly, never offering the whole story, because it didn't belong to him. It belonged to her, and to every quiet soul who had since passed through that space and whispered, "Maybe I'm not alone." That summer, on the longest day of the year, Mr. Howard found something new waiting for him in the nest. A small box, wrapped in newspaper. Inside, a book she had once loved, now rebound by hand, its cover redone in soft cloth. On the front, stitched in gold thread, were the words, "The Girl Who Didn't Disappear." And inside the front cover, in the only handwriting that could have written it, a message. "You taught me how to stay." He didn't cry. He smiled. He closed the book gently, placed it on the top shelf of the nest, and left the lights on a little longer that night. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories aren't shouted. They're passed gently, hand to hand, heart to heart, until they find a home. And now, finally, she had one. The summer breeze carried a warmth that made even the cold corners of the library feel softer. Students came and went as usual, some rushing between assignments, others lingering in the pockets of quiet. But something subtle had changed. There was a reverence to how they treated the nest, like stepping into a sacred space. No rules had been posted, yet everyone knew. You entered with gentleness, you left something behind, even if it was just silence. Mr. Howard often caught himself pausing in the middle of his rounds, watching as students left folded notes, dried flowers, or hand-drawn bookmarks between pages of books. One afternoon, he found a short poem written in red ink on a slip of torn paper. Not all roots need sunlight to grow. Some bloom beneath the hush of knowing. It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. He recognized her voice now, not just in handwriting, but in rhythm, in restraint, in resilience. He started keeping a small box of found notes in his locker, not out of sentimentality, but because he knew they mattered. They were more than messages. They were proof. Proof that once, a girl who had no name, no place, and no words had sparked a quiet revolution of belonging. He often reread them on his break, smiling softly as the hum of fluorescent lights filled the space around him like a lullaby. Late one evening, as a thunderstorm rolled in, Mr. Howard found a sealed envelope tucked inside a returned copy of and of Green Gables. The paper was damp at the edges from humidity. Inside, a letter, longer than any she'd left before. She wrote about new beginnings, about attending classes part-time under her real name, about speaking aloud in a group of strangers and not disappearing afterward. And then, a line that made him pause. Every time I feel afraid again, I remember the man who left granola bars and never asked questions. That night, the storm rattled the windows, but Mr. Howard sat undisturbed. Not because he was untouched by the wind, but because something deeper held him steady, the knowledge that kindness, even when quiet, echoes louder than most people realize. That sometimes the smallest acts leave the biggest footprints. And in his case, those footprints led a lost girl not just back to safety, but forward into herself. The new semester brought with it a fresh wave of students, young faces, nervous laughter, backpacks too heavy for their frames. And with it, new stories. But the nest remained, unchanged in structure, evolving in spirit. It welcomed everyone. No explanations required. Mr. Howard took special care in cleaning around it now, never removing the offerings left behind, always dusting with a feather-light touch. He understood that he wasn't just protecting books anymore. He was protecting a legacy. One morning, he found a small white stone placed atop a stack of poetry. Painted delicately on it were the words, "We don't disappear. We just wait for someone to notice." He tucked it into his pocket without a word, carried it with him through the day, through the mop bucket, through the echoing stairwell, through the quiet pause he always took by Row J. It reminded him that what he had done, what they had done, mattered far beyond those four walls. The library staff finally decided to officially name the nest. They didn't hold a ceremony. No ribbon cutting. Just a brass plaque placed above the chair where she once sat, inscribed with a single line. For the ones who stayed, even when they couldn't be seen. Mr. Howard helped install it. His hands trembled slightly as he tightened the screws. Not out of grief, but out of honor. She never came forward publicly, never spoke at events. But her influence had become part of the institution's heartbeat. Professors referenced her in quiet metaphors. First-year students were told the story, not as a warning, but as a reminder. Someone is always watching, waiting, caring. And though her name was never spoken aloud, everyone knew who she was. And on the day Mr. Howard retired, surrounded by books, kind words, and a table full of granola bars left by students, he was handed a card with no sender. Only one message inside. "I checked out my last book today. It's called Freedom." And beneath it, drawn in silver pen and nest. Empty, but still whole. Mr. Howard kept the card in his coat pocket, running his thumb over the word freedom as if it were embossed in gold. Retirement had always felt like a distant shore, something quiet, maybe bittersweet. But this felt complete. Not because his job had ended, but because his presence had meant something. He hadn't just swept floors. He had witnessed a transformation. He had helped a story unfold without ever needing to hold the pen. The day after his retirement, he returned to the library one last time. Not to work, but to walk. Slowly, quietly, he wandered the aisles, taking in the scent of aged paper and knowing glances. Students nodded as he passed. A few whispered thank yous. In the nest, someone had placed a blank notebook on the chair with a note that read, "For the next one who needs a place to begin." The cycle was continuing, as it should. He left a final note of his own, tucked into a worn copy of Leaves of Grass. Just a sentence, in his gentle handwriting. "I'll still be here, even when I'm not." Because he knew, his fingerprints were now part of the foundation. In every unopened book, In every corner of the library that held silence instead of judgment. In every small moment where someone chose to see another without asking them to explain why they were hiding. Meanwhile, her world had continued to expand. Though she remained anonymous to the public, she enrolled full-time at a university across the city. She still visited the nest sometimes, never at the same time, never in a way that drew attention. But Mr. Howard's colleagues kept the space just as it had been. No one dared clean it. Everyone knew it wasn't clutter. It was belonging. And on one warm autumn evening, nearly 2 years since she had first vanished from her corner of Road J, a new note appeared in the space beneath the brass plaque. It read, "I'm not between chapters anymore. I'm writing my own story now. And I still start every page with your light." It was unsigned, but no one needed to ask who had written it. Mr. Howard's retirement grew into a life of simplicity. He spent mornings tending his small garden, afternoons reading the kinds of books he used to shelve, and evenings sitting by his window, watching the way shadows stretched across the sidewalk, just like they had in the library. But every now and then, something would appear in his mailbox. A postcard with a bookstore's return address, a folded page torn from a poetry magazine, a single word written in the corner. Still, he never responded directly, but he began writing letters. Dozens of them. Not sent, not signed. Just placed in a wooden box in his study labeled, "For the ones who come after." Letters filled with reminders to be gentle, to watch closely, to ask fewer questions, and listen more. He knew someone, maybe many someones, would need those words one day. And when they did, he wanted them to have a guide. At the library, the plaque above the nest remained polished, the seat beneath it always slightly warm. New students came. Some sat in silence. Others left drawings. Some curled into the chair and simply breathed. Her story, though unspoken, had become a thread in the culture of the place. A soft legacy. A reminder that you never really know whose life you're walking beside, until you decide to notice. Years later, on the anniversary of her first disappearance, a memorial event was held. Not for mourning, but for recognition. Survivors of all ages shared stories of quiet places that saved them. One girl stood and said, "I don't know who she is, but I believe she's the reason I asked for help." Another said, "He never said much. Just saw me. That was enough." No names were needed. No applause. Just stories, breathing in unison. And as the sky dimmed outside and candles flickered in every corner of the library, a new poem was taped to the wall in the nest. It read, "We do not vanish. We unfold. And if we are lucky, someone will sit beside us. Until we remember how to begin again." The years moved on, but the echoes never faded. The library remained a quiet refuge, a home to 100 untold stories, many of which were never spoken aloud. Yet each of them left something behind. A slip of paper, a pressed flower, a forgotten name remembered only in the margins of a borrowed book. And through it all, the nest remained untouched by time. Not pristine, lived in, cared for, carried. A new janitor eventually filled Mr. Howard's old role. Young, observant, kind. On his first day, he was handed a small envelope by the head librarian. Inside, a letter from Mr. Howard. Just a few lines. "You're not just here to clean. You're here to notice. Someone will need you. You may never know who. But that doesn't make it less true." The new janitor folded it gently and placed it in his wallet. He understood. One evening, the young janitor found a paperback left open in the nest. A single sentence underlined in soft pencil. Sometimes we find the ones we didn't know we were waiting for. And next to it, a fresh note. "Whoever you are, keep watching. Someone is always arriving." It was the first message in years from her. Older now, wiser, still writing. Not for herself anymore, but for the next girl, the next story, the next silence that needed a listener. She had become a quiet guardian of the forgotten, working with youth shelters, teaching literacy workshops, helping others who had vanished in ways no headline would ever capture. She never told them her full story. She never had to. Her presence was enough. Her patience. Her eyes that didn't flinch when someone sat in silence. She had become, in essence, what Mr. Howard once was to her. The still point in a turning world. And every year, on the anniversary of the day she disappeared from the library, she sent a single envelope to that same old building. Inside, a folded card, one drawing, and a single sentence. No signature, no return address. Just the same 3 words, rewritten in different ways. I remember you. Time, as it does, softened the edges of memory, but it never erased the lines. Mr. Howard, now older, grayer, slower, sometimes visited the library when no one noticed. He'd sit near the windows, his eyes drifting from shelf to shelf, retracing the old routes. Sometimes a student would smile, not recognizing him, but somehow sensing his gentleness. And sometimes he'd slip a note into a book just to keep the cycle going. On his final birthday, a small package arrived on his doorstep. No name, no return address. Inside was a leather-bound notebook filled with letters. Not from her alone, but from many. Kids who had stayed in shelters, who had sat in the nest, who had read the notes and finally dared to leave one of their own. Dozens of stories, all echoing one truth. Someone saw me, and it made me stay. He wept, quietly, not from sadness, from a fullness that can only come when you realize that the smallest thing you ever did mattered beyond your lifetime. He read every letter twice, some 3 times, and when he reached the final page, there it was, her handwriting, unmistakable, a message not to the janitor, but to the man who changed her life by saying nothing more than take care. Her letter ended with 5 words. You were my first home. That night, he lit a candle by his window, placed the notebook beside it, and sat in silence. Because he knew, even if the world forgot his name, somewhere, someone would always remember the man who left granola bars in the corner of Row J. And far across the city, in a shelter filled with noise and heartbreak, and the beginning of something new, a girl scribbled her name into a book for the first time. She didn't know who had left the words she found that morning, but they made her feel real. And that was enough to begin again. In a modest classroom tucked inside a city shelter, the girl with the scribbled name on the book sat cross-legged on the floor. The notebook she clutched had no cover, but every page inside was a lifeline. Messages in soft pencil, gentle drawings, and reflections signed only with initials or symbols. She didn't know it was once called the Nest Journal. She only knew it made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Seen? Her counselor noticed the change, a new steadiness in her gaze, a quiet boldness when she raised her hand. One day the girl asked, "Who writes these?" The counselor smiled. A lot of people, but it started with a girl who used to sleep in a library, and a janitor who never asked why. The girl didn't say anything after that. She just nodded, and later that night, she stayed behind to write her own letter, not to anyone specific, but to whoever might need it after her. She wrote, "I didn't know I was still here until I found your words. You showed me I don't have to be loud to be real. Thank you for waiting." Then she folded it, slid it into the back of the notebook, and left it on the desk, right where someone else might pick it up. It was, after all, how she had started, with one quiet sentence in the right place at the right time. That's how the light kept moving, not in sparks, but in carried warmth. Meanwhile, the mural downtown had aged with grace. Time had chipped the paint, but the message remained untouched. She reads in silence. A small plaque now rested beneath it, unofficial but permanent. It read, "To the ones who return in pieces, we will hold what you drop until you're ready to carry it again." Every week, someone new left something there. A drawing, a scarf, a book with corners turned in. No one asked why. No one needed to. And back at the library, the young janitor had taken to writing small notes of his own, inspired by the letters he'd read in Mr. Howard's journal. He didn't sign them. He didn't want recognition. He just placed them in books with titles like Hope and Stillness and Come Back When You're Ready. Because now, he was the one holding space. And the story was still being written. Years later, on the 15th anniversary of the first night the girl had vanished from Row J, a quiet event was held at the library. It wasn't publicized. No banners. Just a circle of chairs around the nest, lit by flickering tea lights and filled with voices that had once felt invisible. Survivors, students, staff, each one carrying a piece of the story, even if they hadn't realized it. At the center of the room sat a small wooden box. Inside were hundreds of folded notes, drawings, and messages left by those who had passed through the nest over the years. They called it the legacy box. No one read them aloud. That wasn't the point. The point was that they existed, a record of presence, of people who had felt lost and chose, against all odds, to stay. The girl, now a woman, returned that night. Not as a mystery, not as a myth, but as a quiet guest. She stood near the back, hands folded, watching as others spoke the same words she once carried alone. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't need to. Her story was already here, living in every whispered thank you, every tearful breath, every moment someone said, "I thought I was the only one." And when the room emptied and the candles burned low, she slipped a note into the legacy box. The last one of the night. "You never knew my name, but you knew my soul. And because of that, I'm still here, and so are hundreds more. This story is no longer mine. It's everyone's." She stepped out into the cool night, breathing deep, her footsteps soft against the pavement. As she passed the mural one more time, now dimly lit by streetlight and time, she paused, touched the base of it, and whispered, "Thank you for seeing me." And somewhere, miles away, in a home lined with journals and soft candlelight, an old man stirred in his chair, opened a fresh page, and began to write again. Some stories don't end with a final chapter. They echo. They ripple through the silence long after the last page is turned. What began as a girl asleep in the shadows of a library became a map for countless others learning how to return to themselves. Her presence, her vanishing, and her quiet reappearance were never just about being lost or found. They were about the power of being seen. And in the hush of a janitor's routine, the smallest act of noticing became a lifeline. There are people walking among us every day, invisible not because they want to be, but because no one dares to look closely enough. They speak in glances, in silence, in tremors behind their smiles. And often, what they need isn't to be rescued, but to be acknowledged. This story shows us that the simple act of witnessing, without pressure or expectation, can be the first step in someone's return to life. The girl in the library never asked for attention. She never demanded answers. But when someone left a granola bar instead of a question, she stayed. And over time, her story became a shelter for others like her. Because what we do in quiet moments, the kindness we offer without needing recognition, those are the acts that last. Those are the lights that continue burning long after we leave the room. So if you've ever felt unnoticed, unheard, or unfinished, let this be your reminder. Your story matters. And somewhere, someone is already holding space for your return. And if you're someone who's seen another person drifting through the edges of the world, don't look away. You don't need to fix them. Just stay close. Just notice. Just care. That's how lives begin again. Not with noise, but with presence. If this story moved you, or reminded you of someone you once were, or someone you once knew, consider subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and sharing your reflections in the comments. Sometimes, your voice may be the light someone else is searching for. And who knows, maybe today, you were someone's first home.